Welcome back to the Leader Revolution, the underdog's playbook for creating rapid innovation, killer teams, and the organization everyone wants to join. I'm your host, Dr. Simeon Roger, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about Comrade DILBERTsky, how a superpower got crushed by a superior corporate culture. History shows us that if we see corporate culture and leadership as optional extras, no amount of financing, no pool of resources or talent or facilities is going to end up meaning anything. Want proof? About this time of year in 1940, a forgotten war was taking place between the tiny Scandinavian nation of Finland and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union wanted a larger buffer zone for its Baltic port of Leningrad, and unfortunately for the Finns, they were in the way. No one thought the war could last very long after all. Finland was a new nation with few modern weapons, modest military history, and a tiny population, whereas the Soviet Union had the world's largest army, more tanks than any other country, and more aircraft than the rest of the world combined. But in that winter of 1939 to 1940, a strange thing would happen. A barely armed country would inflict so much damage on one of the world's great powers in self-defense that it would guarantee its independence for decades to come. The secret? Despite the vast gulf in technology between the two armies, it paled in comparison with the even greater gap in what we today call corporate culture. Principle 1. Give your people what they need to do the job. The notion that a Russian army could be unprepared for a winter war that they started might surprise us today, but it's true nonetheless. Not all Soviet units had proper winter uniforms, none had winter camouflage, and none had proper winter tents. Frostbite was claiming casualties even before the fighting began. In the Soviet mind, the soldier was expendable, and as a result, the Red Army tended to neglect the details of their soldiers' welfare. The Finns, on the other hand, had a sophisticated support system for their soldiers. Most importantly, the Finns fed their soldiers appropriately for a winter campaign. Surviving an Arctic winter requires a diet high in fat and protein, while the Red Army expected their soldiers to survive on black bread in all conditions. This would lead to the so-called Sausage War incident, in which a Soviet attack came to a halt when their malnourished soldiers smelled the sausage soup being cooked in the Finnish field kitchens. Ignoring their officers, the starved soldiers went straight for the food. Principle number 2, don't tell them how to do it. The Red Army had one main tactic on which it would continue to rely throughout the Second World War: mass a superior force and make a frontal attack. Unfortunately for them, the Finns were so well dug in on the Mannerheim line that they wiped out frontal assaults time after time. When this didn't work, Stalin fell back on his second standard tactic of shooting the commanders and hoping things would improve. Under this kind of pressure, alternate tactics were found. Instead of charging at the enemy, the Red Army decided to go around them. However, when the Red Army tried to invade north of the Mannerheim line defenses, they found the Finns were just as capable of mobile guerrilla warfare as they were of static defense, and a horrendous number of Soviet soldiers lost their lives in the attempt. Let them handle the how. The Finns had very little modern equipment and no tanks in an era of tank warfare, but their ingenious tactical flexibility allowed them to exploit the weather and terrain of their country. And how did they do that? Well, moreover, and this is the key, their tactical decision-making was devolved to the level of those fighting at the front, which allowed them to adapt and innovate far faster than their Soviet opponents, who, by the way, were in constant fear of being shot for trying something that didn't work. They would ambush tanks in forests, jamming logs into their tracks and throwing Molotov cocktails and satchel charges at their engine decks. Finnish use of ambushes, ski troop operations, and snipers had an effect vastly disproportionate to their numbers. In the north, they managed to split the Red Army into small besieged segments called moties. Even though the Finns were vastly outnumbered, their over-snow mobility allowed them to keep up the pressure. When the Soviets attempted to airdrop supplies to their men, the Finns imitated Soviet radio signals and redirected the airdrops to their own lines. In one night raid, ski troops even managed to get 2 neighboring Red Army units to fight each other. Principle 4. You are responsible for ensuring your people are motivated. The Red Army was a vast regimented machine of conscripts fighting in a country they knew little about, while the Finns were citizen soldiers fighting for the life of their country, and it showed. Principle 5. Give them the leaders they need. The Red Army had another handicap. Many of its experienced officers had either been shot, sent to Siberia, or sacked by Stalin in the late 1930s. The purges removed 3 of 5 marshals, 13 of 15 army commanders, 50 of 57 corps commanders, 154 out of 186 divisional commanders, and 36,761 officers of all ranks, over half the officer corps, including 3 of these 5 marshals of the Soviet Union, all of them shot between 1937 and 1939 by a paranoid dictator. Principle 6, understand how you are demotivating your people. At the same time, the NKVD, the notorious Soviet secret police, had the authority to shoot any officer at any time, which certainly did not encourage initiative in the Red Army. Officers attempting to get their men out of hopeless situations were shot as cowards. Command was shared between line officers and political officers who vetted all decisions in terms of Communist Party dogma. The Soviets had expected total victory within a few weeks. 3 months later, the Red Army had lost 127,000 men and 3,500 tanks, while Finland had lost just 26,000 men and gained captured tanks, aircraft, and other equipment. The Soviet Union's technical victory was achieved solely through numerical superiority and the exhaustion of Finnish supplies, and as such was a political embarrassment. Finland lost only a small percentage of its territory, but not its independence. The focus of the Finnish army was on supporting its troops and empowering the initiative of its small units, and the results spoke for themselves. Lesson 7, learn strategic thinking. As for the Soviet leadership, they failed to anticipate the second-order consequence of a humiliation at the hands of a smaller nation like Finland. And what was that? It was precisely this failure that emboldened Hitler to launch his all-out attack on the USSR less than 18 months later, an attack that cost some 20 million Soviet lives. There has never been a better object lesson in the enormous cost of a dysfunctional organization or the rewards of a healthy one when results really mattered. So remember, you have to be willing to take all of this to its logical conclusion. You too need a truly 21st century organizational culture. So remember to grab your free copy of Resilience Culture using the link below. I'm Dr. Simeon Roger for the Leader Revolution. We'll see you next time.